Hello everyone. Once again you find me shuffling into my chair to do another video for this year's 2023 World Book Night. This is in fact the third year that I've been doing this. It's really my little hobby, so I hope you enjoy them. I certainly enjoy the planning out of them, and I always find something a little bit different to talk about, I hope, anyway. So we'll make a start with something that's quite unusual for me, and this is two magazines. Vintage Road Scene. Very strange. Why would I be having copies of Vintage Road Scene? Well, my husband likes a lot of different magazines, and these came to his attention because they have articles about mobile libraries in them. For anybody who is interested in mobile libraries, there are two editions that have covered the different areas of the country and the different mobile libraries that these areas had. Sorry, I'm covering my face. Now, in some parts of the country, including in Derbyshire, currently there is a small service still operating, and certainly in parts of the Scottish Islands there are still operating mobile libraries. That's the bottom of that one. And over the page, I think this is the last page. Yes, it is. There are some here that were originally other things that then became mobile libraries. I used to go out on the mobile library. I used to do it in two different areas for two different authorities. I didn't do it very often, but I really enjoyed my time on the mobile libraries. It's a very unique way of running a library. It's very different. I found it really enjoyable. It was really nice to revisit a part of what is now my personal history. And whenever I see a library van, even if it's just going to school, it makes me smile. And I think, there they are. They're still doing it. They're still delivering to the door. So we now move on to explore my first book that I'm going to talk about. I decided that through the year I read some books that I wouldn't consider that I would normally review. But then I decided, well, I really should talk about some of these books because they may help somebody else, just as they've helped me. And here's one. Cognitive Behaviour Therapy. It's the third edition, and it's by A.V. Joseph. Now, I wanted to try and overcome a particular issue that I have, a medical issue that I have, and that I'd struggled with for a few years. And it was suggested to me that I try cognitive behaviour therapy, and I thought, well, I can access that in certain different ways. And I looked at books on the subject before, and I hadn't found anything that I particularly liked. However, I had quite a bit of spare time one morning to go into a library, not my local one, another one some miles away, and I found this book. It's mainly to do with helping you with, say, a work issue, but it's broken down into sections, so you can look at them and pick out the bits that you like, reflect on what you want. Chapter 3, setting your goals, and you can look through the sections of the sections and seeing which of those bits might be something that you could do with. Overcoming obstacles to goal achievement. For me, it was, what do I want to achieve? And how do I want to achieve this? And if I don't achieve this, what then? And it takes you through all of those steps. And what I did when I finished the book, I'd made various different little bits of paper to mark pages with. I then went through and wrote myself from this a letter, as it were, in the page of my diary for which it was significant. And all I'll say is, along with a good cup of tea and some conversation, shall I say, I did achieve this goal. I was absolutely thrilled and relieved that I'd done this. And when I came home, the first thing I did was write out on another piece of paper what I'd written to myself in my diary from using this book, so that I can revisit it and not wonder to myself, what did I write? So if you think this book can help you, I'll just hold it there for a minute. Try it, and I really hope it will. Now, usually when I read a Christmas book, obviously it's at the end of the year, quite often I don't manage to discuss my Christmas books. I did in fact talk about The Christmas Angel by Marcia Willett. I think it was last year's book vlog, because it was a particularly good book and I really enjoyed it. And I read this one, I think I was still reading it into the new year. It was new out last year, so I'm doing well, I'm up to date. This is Jenny Colgan's The Christmas Bookshop. For those of you who haven't read it, it is actually set in Edinburgh, and I do believe the geography is correct from the way I read it. So if you would like to read a book set in Edinburgh, and you know Edinburgh, you may enjoy it just from that mention of Edinburgh. I enjoyed this book right from the beginning. I know some people might find it slow or wondering what the point of it is. But what I liked about it was the fact that the main person in the book sets off working in a non-book related department store, and part of the plot is that she then ends up in this particular bookstore in Edinburgh. Why is it called The Christmas Bookshop? Well, that will reveal itself to you when you read it. I liked all the description, particularly because, it reminded me of my own life, of when she was looking at all the shelves and all the piles of books and everything needing sorting and wondering where she could possibly start. And as she went along, she realised that she could use her previous retail experience to sort out the mess and to actually get an idea, start to make the windows look lovely, and to start to get people in to the store. And then she does story times as well, which again reminded me of my own life, which I really enjoyed. And for me, I thought at that point, oh, this is just a really nice story. What I didn't know was that actually there is more to this book than that. And it involves, somewhat later on in the story, it involves the man who actually owns and runs the bookstore. And we find out, how can I put it, about his past earlier years and what happened to him and how he has become like he has. It's a really good part of the book, and it shows you about how someone can come along and help this person, and in helping that person they actually help themselves. There are also other things in the plot involving a family and two young men, and you think one thing's going to happen and then actually another thing happens instead. It's just got a very satisfactory ending. I really enjoyed this. If it's a kind of book that you like, if especially you like reading about bookshops, books, it does mention certain books in the book as well, which is another thing I enjoyed, because I wrote down the books and thought I'm going to explore these and see if they're actually real or made up. It's just a really nice, good book, and perfect for reading, I would say, from December right through to the end of January. So Jenny Colgan's The Christmas Bookshop. The next book I'm going to talk about, I think it had sort of mixed reviews, and also it was very difficult to find apparently. I asked for it for Christmas, not this year, the year before I believe. Took me a while to get around to reading it. I did get it, and it is Let's Do It, the authorised biography of Victoria Wood. Now, many of us loved Victoria Wood, and we still love to watch her comedy series, Acorn Antique series, and especially her Dinner Ladies series. The reason this book was met with a little bit of, I wouldn't say negativity, but a little bit of awkwardness, was because it shows Victoria Wood in her, if I say true light, wouldn't be right. It shows Victoria Wood how she really, really was. Jasper Rees, who wrote it, she knew him personally, and the family wanted him to write this book, and so that's what he did, and he was really honest in it. If you like a lot of description of how a TV series is made, for example, this goes into very, very minute detail about that. It also goes into minute detail of how Victoria Wood worked, which may come as a surprise to some people. It may not be what they perceived it to be, shall I say. Again, she was a genius, in my opinion. And you can only get that genius quite often by how you operate and who you work with and who you don't work with and how you work with those people. This has it all in. I liked it from that point of view, because rather than missing things out or being very, how can I put it, very light about it, it really does go into the crux of everything, and even down to how she did write Let's Do It, which is on its own a really great piece of work. There are a couple of sections that have photographs in. I'm just trying to flick through to a section with a photograph in. I just can't get hold of a photo. Here we go. Let's find a nice double spread that we can see. And these are various different stages of her early career. So you have black and white ones and colour ones, which are really good. It is quite a big book. Will take some getting through. I don't know if there's an audiobook of this. If there is, some of you may prefer it in audiobook because of the detail that's in it. But I think at the end of the day, what I took away from this was an appreciation of just how much her work meant to her and how much it meant to her to get it right. The next book was actually my book of the year last year in 2022. It's written by one of, if not my favourite novelists, British, and the That person is Christina Jones, and the book is Summer at Sandcastle Cottage. It even starts with this lovely cover. Some book covers I don't necessarily like, but this just, it actually sums up the book. It is a ray of sunshine, this book. I read it last year, which was not a very easy year for my family. I didn't get a lot of chance to read, but I picked this up, and it is one of those books you can just lose yourself in it. There are so many descriptions of things like how the smell of the cooking of the fish and chips even, and the way they're eating the fish and chips, and the party in the garden. There is such a lot I could say about this book. If you like staffies, if you like children, if you're a TA or a teacher, if you like sand and sandcastles, and if you just want a lovely, feel-good story, this is the book for you. Summer at Sandcastle Cottage is literally summer, and it's at the seaside. And yes, it does have to some degree a plot where you think, I know what's going to happen. And in actual fact, the characters in this book become friends, and you want things to happen for your friends that you want to happen. And these things do happen in this book. So basically, to sum this book up, it's summer, staffies, seaside, fish and chips, and sunshine. Now, the next book, for me, was a little bit of a bone of contention. Excuse me just a minute while I just pull up some information that I wrote that I couldn't remember, so I wanted to get a copy. I took a photo of what I'd written. I'd looked forward to reading this book for an awful long time, and in fact, I don't really go for making sure I read each book in a series, but in the case of Robert Galbraith, I always read the book in the series. I always buy them and I always read them. Troubled Blood was for me a bit of a bone of contention. And I, unfortunately, this time could only give it 4 out of 5 and not 5 like it normally gets. And the reason for this is I found some of the research for one of the things to be a bit lacking. Now, I'm going to read to you from my phone what I actually wrote about it. Bear with me. Let me just open it. Here we are. Now, J.K. Rowling had a surprising lack of research when she talks about a reel of 16mm film. One character says she hasn't got a camera to play it back through. Then they talk about a projector and later a video projector. Now, 16mm film can only be played on a projector. It cannot be put into a camera and played, and it certainly cannot be fitted into a video projector. This information is easy to find, and the lack of knowledge and the discussions that keep changing about it just don't work in my head image-wise, because everyone is wrong. Even the editor didn't pick up on this, which shows that all the people working on this have not actually checked this information. And normally everything she does is thoroughly researched, and I found it strange. However, in the recent TV series, they had actually amended this, which I was pleased about. Now, for people who don't know, and I only know this because I live in a family that knows about this, this here, bear with me, is 16mm film. So that's what we're actually talking about. In the book, that's what it talks about. So that would be on a reel, a bigger reel, but it would be on a reel like this. And that would go onto what some of you may be familiar with, an old-fashioned projector. You may have had them in school, and that's how you used to watch a film. I saw Ring of Bright Water at school, for example, on a projector. This one is 8mm standard 8, and this one is Super 8. But as you can see, the difference, that's your 16mm film. And so that's why it was very difficult for me to visualise it in my head, because the way it was written kept changing. And as I say, I don't know if J.K. Rowling as Galbraith wrote it that way, or if it was edited by anybody, but it certainly, it changes from one page to the next, and I found it really most unsatisfactory. Also in this book, there is a name of a character that keeps being mentioned. I had to look it up in the end. It's a Gaelic name, which I couldn't pronounce, which was again a problem for me, because I didn't want to stop the flow of reading the book to find out how you pronounced that name and its meaning. When I did look up the name, I thought, well, there are other names that really could have been used instead of this one. And I did feel that it was J.K. Rowling trying to say, hey, I know this and you don't know this, and I know you're not going to know this. Yes, but you didn't get your information right about the 16mm film you were talking about. So again, I felt a little bit sort of fed up by that, but I did keep reading it. However, the subject matter of this book is not something that I particularly enjoyed, and I have to be honest and say that if it had been anybody else, I probably wouldn't have continued to read it. There are also names of clothes that I don't know what they are. Even when I looked them up, I don't know what they are. And I felt that there were certain aspects of this novel that left me feeling a little bit sort of grubby, if you know what I mean. Now, I know it's a crime novel, and I know that they can be like that. All I can say is I haven't as yet read the next one, which is already out in hardback, but I'm going to pick up the paperback at some point and read it and see if it's less of a disappointment than Troubled Blood, because yes, I enjoyed it to some degree. I have not enjoyed it as much as the others that I've read before, and I hope that I can then next time review that one more positively. Here we have the penultimate book, so hey, not much longer to keep listening. Pause it, get a cup of tea, anything, Here we have a book that I found in the works, bought, and then when I came home actually realised it was on my reading list. And it is Strictly on Ice by Helen Buckley. Now, this was a major surprise, and I did end up giving this the full 5 stars. And the reason I gave it 5 stars was because it was most unexpected. When I first started to read this book, I thought to myself, how low am I going to have to score this? Is it worth me continuing to read this book? It's a bit like some kind of, like a reality TV programme, because that is part of the plot, and all the characters seem to be very vacuous and very selfish, and nothing seemed to be happening. It all seemed to be just nothing. But I thought, no, I'll carry on, because it did have descriptions in of ice skating manoeuvres, etc. So I thought, well, I'll keep going. And then, this book is like a wolf in sheep's clothing. A certain set of behaviour from one character to another character begins. And you read it and you think, okay. And as it goes forward, more of this behaviour occurs, and you're thinking, now, this person really needs to be taking steps to sort this out in whatever way is suitable. I won't give the game away in here. And various things continue and other things happen. And all I will say is, if you haven't read this and you think to yourself, I don't think it's for me, you'd be surprised. And all I will say is, you may recognise yourself, or you may recognise somebody else in this, and you may recognise the situation that they are in, and it may help them or you with this particular issue. It doesn't seem to be at the forefront of any particular lists of books. It's definitely a book for women. And beware. And it gets a full 5 out of 5. And my final one, with apologies to Kate Thompson for keeping her waiting, is the book that I knew she was writing, and it's called The Little Wartime Library. Now, Kate asked a question today on her Facebook page about why do you read historical fiction? Now, it's not something that I necessarily go for, historical fiction, but obviously people who know that I was a library assistant, and before I stopped working I was an assistant in charge. I have, in between times, I have done other jobs, including working in W.H. Smith's. So I've worked with books, I would say, for the majority of the 35 years that I worked. And so quite often I'll pick up a book, a novel especially, because it has library on it. But I knew Kate was working on this book, and I knew that she'd done an awful lot of research and interviewed many people for this book, including librarians and other people who work in libraries, people who lived at the time and used the library that is the foundation of the book about Bethnal Green Library, and how it became to be a library in the underground during World War II, and the story that she builds around it, including the two main characters. It's such a really good book, and it shows that in times of crisis, as we were in during COVID, books are really valuable, and your library is, and was back in the Second World War, really valuable. It is not just a way of losing yourself in a fiction book. You can also read a fiction book and take more away from it than that, as Kate writes as part of her story in here. But you can also be given information books and leaflets that can also really help you or somebody else. Do not underestimate the fact that you may not think it now, but your libraries are still valuable, and if you do have one in your area, even if you don't use it very often, they are there. You can join them and just borrow ebooks for free on your tablet, e-reader, or whatever format you want to get it in. And it also showed how the people who basically living in the underground at that time, empowered themselves by using the library. There's so much I could talk about with this book, about the story. I write in my review about, I was once told that I don't have any grey areas in my life. I only have black and white areas. Well, when I'm at work, in general, they need to be black and white. But as with the character in here, sometimes she would bend the rules, as did I, if I thought it was something that needed to be dealt with. When your back is against the wall and something needs doing, or you feel that a person really needs help, you will do an extra bit of footwork to make sure that that occurs. This is all in here, along with obviously other things that happen in this novel that are not connected directly to the story about the library, but they are people that involve themselves with the library. So there are other stories that run alongside the library story. I also particularly liked this book because in the back there are two sections, I think it is. There's the author's note that Kate's written, and then there's the, bear with me, I can't get the pages to turn, I don't want to damage the book, the true story of Bethnal Green Library and the fight to save it. There we are. Because in fact it did need saving. A lot of areas are losing libraries. They've been losing libraries for many years, and staff. Hours have been being cut. Some libraries recently have managed to save their libraries, but this story that Kate has written proves that councillors, particularly because it's normally local authorities that run those libraries, will often disregard a library for whatever reason. Well, this is a warning that, we may not put up with that. And then further on there's read for victory in the back. Now this reminded me rather of during COVID, when I knew, even though for 4 months I was working from home for the first 4 months of the COVID lockdown, and I mean, was I working a lot? It depended on what I had to do. But after that time, people were really glad to get back into libraries, and I had quite a lot of people saying to me, "Oh, I'm so glad to see you open," or "I'm so glad you're doing click and collect. I've really, really needed this." There were huge numbers of people joining libraries so they could access their ebook service, and so the numbers went up. So it does prove that they are still needed. On the last note about Read for Victory, page 324, which I've marked off, and in actual fact, page 325, beginning of chapter 23, in actual fact there's a pen mark. I couldn't believe I'd done that. I couldn't believe I'd marked a book. It was completely accidental. I went to make a note of page 324 on a piece of paper and nudged myself and marked the book. However, I thought, that's really strange. I've marked off the page that I wanted to mark off quite accidentally. Page 325, and this is what it says, and it sums up for me what reading's all about. Every day she sat with Billy during visiting hours and read. She read on the bus from the library to the hospital. She read in the newly resurrected storytime session, and to Beatty and Marie when she tucked them in last thing at night. She read because right now it was the only thing that made any sense. And I think that rings true. Then, now, and onwards. And that is the book that, as somebody else described, is a love story to libraries. And it really is. And I'd like to say thank you to Kate for writing such a lovely book. And I hope if any of these things in the books I've talked about, or any of the books I've talked to you about today, are things you want to explore or would like to read, I hope you do, and I hope you enjoy them. And I'll see you at some point along the line, if not before, one in October, when I'll do some poetry